Hello, Professor Perlmutter. It's a real great pleasure that you are able to join us all the way from the United States. Professor Perlmutter is the Dean and Professor of the College of Media and Communication at Texas Tech University. He used to be the head of the journalism program at Iowa. He's a scholar in political communication. He's written so many books on political communication. He's been on TV shows in America, but really a leading scholar in the field. It's a real great pleasure that we have Professor Perlmutter join us today to have this discussion, not just on what Donald Trump said about Africa, but about political communication in the modern era and American politics. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor Perlmutter.
Thank you, but you forgot to say the most important thing is that I once worked with you, it's very prestigious from having an association with you. You've become so famous in the work that you've done since you left Iowa. We're very proud of you.
Thank you very much, Prof. That's right. That's very, very, very significant. When I was studying at the University of Iowa, Prof was the head of the school over there. And so, well, it's a testament to your training. You trained as well. I enjoyed working over you. Very, very inspiring. And you continue to be an inspirational figure in the academy in media and communication globally. Okay, so we'll get this started. So really, before we get into political communication, which is really your area, this has been 1 year of the Donald Trump presidency. We've seen a president unlike any other before. What do you make of his presidency so far?
I think I can really restrict my talk to just his communications. He is unusual. We've never had a president who has so completely seized the non-traditional modes of communication from what was in the past. If you think just going back a few generations, contact with presidents was very limited. Presidents might issue press releases through subordinates, or they might occasionally have a press conference. And we have seen some revolutions in communication technology. For example, Franklin Roosevelt was known as the fireside chat president because there was a new communication technology that was in everyone's home called radio, and he wanted to talk to the American people directly, and so he started having fireside chat radio addresses. It was a way of bypassing the traditional news media, who he thought would not give him a fair shake. And then during the 1950s and 60s, we saw the rise of television, and John F. Kennedy became famous as the first true television president. He had press conferences where he often challenged and even insulted the press. Again, he wanted to go around the press directly to the American people. In the 1980s and 90s, we had cable television and the rise of presidents like Nixon and then Reagan, who felt that what they needed to do was create beautiful and interesting images that would again go directly to the American people. Well, social media era started really 2004 election, earliest you could say there was social media, blogging and such. And politicians, including Howard Dean and then later Barack Obama, said, well, this is a wonderful medium for reaching voters and potential voters and donors directly and making an appeal directly. So you could say Donald Trump is new in how much he uses, for example, Twitter as an instrument of policy making and of public statements, but he's really the next revolution in a long series of evolutions and revolutions of how politicians want to reach out to the people directly to affect their opinions and their votes.
Thank you very much. That's really a very broad history, giving us a trajectory coming on to the present age. And you'll remember Marshall McLuhan, he made the phrase very popular, the medium is the message. So I guess he who masters the medium of communication has always had the advantage in terms of communicating. When you look at Donald Trump, you did make the point that he's used Twitter, for example, as an instrument of communication, as public policy making and announcing major government policies. How would you assess whether it has worked or has not worked? In what situations has it worked? How do you assess the use of these communicative tools?
Yeah, and actually that's very hard because I think a lot of people have made up their mind that they either love Trump or hate Trump. And so it's very hard for them to say that something didn't work if they love Trump, and it's very hard for them to say something worked if they hate Trump. So I'm trying to be objective here and say that, yes, as you said, we have to look at individual circumstances. What we have here is a president who is making policy through social media. Remember, it used to be that you thought of communications as a way to communicate about something that is policy. So a president would give a press conference, or Barack Obama would have a town hall on MySpace, but to communicate what had already been decided. It seems like Trump is deciding as he is Twittering, and his communication is reaching world leaders targeted towards them. Let's take North Korea, for example. Here's a case where we might see possibly a beneficial outcome of that kind of foreign policy. He is making threats directly to another leader, which is also pretty unusual. American presidents tend to be veiled or a little bit circumspect in the way that they speak. But he's saying to North Korea, you know what, if you keep acting this way, we're going to destroy you. That's a pretty direct threat. And actually, Twitter, it works really well on Twitter because Twitter is only a few characters. So I'm going to kill you is easy to communicate on Twitter. And the message is received. So right now, I've noticed that North Korea, for the first time in a long time, is apparently willing to have some discussions about their behavior, about nuclear weapons, about missiles, about almost anything. Now, was that affected by Trump? Possibly. I mean, when the president of the United States threatens you, you really have to be completely insane to pay no attention whatsoever. And the North Korean regime has a lot of problems, but I don't think they're completely insane. They actually care about their own survival. So we'll see in the next couple of years if North Korea decides to engage in negotiations that reduce the level of threat and the level of risk to the world, then you could say that that kind of bluster and threat over Twitter might, in that individual case, have had a positive outcome. Now, of course, some other people might say, oh, but it's very risky. It is, but that's the way he's decided to conduct foreign policy.
Great.
Now, I would say, yeah.
I'm sorry to cut you, but I just wanted, before we get into his recent comments about Africa and all of that, and one last thing to make it even more relevant to our Ghanaian audience. And so people have been wondering, how should our presidency, how should our politicians take advantage of these new media and communicative tools? Some people have said, as you rightly alluded to, that sometimes if it's instantaneous, it tends to make the person erratic. You made a very interesting statement saying that he decides policy whilst he's tweeting. Globally or from a general perspective, would you say this is something that politicians in Ghana, for instance, or how should politicians or the president be using these tools? Some people have said it helps to link the citizens and all of that. Is that something we should be embracing?
Well, can you hear me? Because I'm seeing a message that there's a problem in the connection. Is it still good for you?
Yes, I can hear you all right, though.
Oh, okay, all right, fine. It depends on the politician. It depends on the situation. I mean, we could go through a number of situations where I think that Twitter foreign policy probably is not very helpful. Now, let's step back a minute. Donald Trump has been for most of his life a businessman. He's used to walking into a room, and maybe he doesn't love the person that he's having a negotiation with, but he wants to make money. He wants to win the negotiation. Like most good businessmen, he knows he probably wants to do business with you the day after the deal is done. In other words, do more than one deal. So you could say the best way to deal with Donald Trump is to treat it as a business negotiation and ignore some of the things that he says. Because you can imagine, you're having a very tough business negotiation, and it's actually a very well-known tactic to get angry, to maybe even, leave the room and say, okay, that's it. I'm angry at you. That's it. We're not going to do any business. I'm leaving. Bye-bye, right? But you know that maybe that's a little bit of an act, that I'm just trying to make sure that you're off balance a little bit and that, you'll say, oh, no, please come back. Let's continue negotiations, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's the problem, is that he's used to situations where we say in our world that there's an interlocutor between your brain and your mouth, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't say everything that comes into your head. But he is saying a lot of things that just pop into his head. Obviously, nobody is editing some of the things that he says. That can work face to face, individually, in a closed room with only a few people there. It is much more difficult in an open arena. So I would warn politicians that this may or may not work for Donald Trump, but it is a very risky venture to try as anyone else who is not Donald Trump.
Right, absolutely.
Because I mean, if you think about the president of Ivory Coast or the president of Ghana, if they started threatening their neighbors with Twitter, their neighbors would not go, "Oh my gosh, okay, we have to negotiate with you." No, they would just say, "Okay, all right, let's go to war." You know, I mean, it depends on who you are if you're going to be making threats or saying everything that you think.
Absolutely, absolutely. So it differs from individual and then even from situation to situation. Now let's zoom in on something that has been happening pretty recently. Another media star or celebrity, or let's say television star, Oprah Winfrey, gave the speech at the Golden Globes, and the whole political world went agog. People started speculating about if she'll become a president too. And I believe the parallels are being drawn because Donald Trump also was a reality TV star and all of that. What do you make of this particular chatter? And how do you assess the chances?
So suppose I was called by Oprah tomorrow. She's not going to do this.
Right.
And what I would say to her is you have certain advantages. I mean, in politics, when you're running for office, name recognition is important. She has probably 100% name recognition. She probably has more name recognition than the president or Hillary Clinton. I mean, more people know who Oprah is than probably know who's the vice president, for example. So she has the best possible name recognition. Second, she has a very positive image. I think if you did a survey of people, what do you think of Oprah? Most people would say, oh, I have a pretty positive view of Oprah. Third, she has money, a lot of money. She can write checks to herself. She doesn't have to go begging for money to other people, but she also has a lot of rich friends who will give her money. So she has three very important bases for running for president. Now, what are the issues? What are the negatives? First, she does have no political experience, but you know, apparently the American public doesn't care about that anymore. I mean, Barack Obama was not the most experienced political leader, diplomatic leader of industry before he became president. Donald Trump was a successful businessman and reality television star. So apparently we don't care that much anymore that you have a resume of, say, 10 years as a governor or something like that. Also, she has done a lot of political topics so that she has a sort of quasi-expertise that people assume. She's a very smart person. I don't think she'll embarrass herself by not knowing the answer to, you know, where is Ghana or something like that, right? Okay.
Right.
However, and this is the big problem, is that first, she has some questions on her record. She has a long record of supporting, I have to say this, very kooky causes. Dr. Oz, you know, medical thing, anti-vaccine causes. I don't think she's taken an exact position, but boy, if you're the opposition candidate, you are going to be able to tie her to some very embarrassing endorsements of medicines and things that most Americans think are charlatans, you know, witch doctor level stuff. And that's not going to be very good. The other issue is personal. When you are a very successful business person or a very successful celebrity, you naturally tend to have people around you who say, oh, you are so wonderful. You give your opinion and everybody around you says, yes, David, you are 100% right. And by the way, you are also very beautiful. And now, that can work if you live in a Hollywood mansion and you're surrounded by people who think you're wonderful, or you're in New York and in an executive suite and everybody says, yes, yes, you are right. It does not work in politics because you will meet other politicians you have to work with that think they are wonderful and think you are wrong. Journalists will ask you difficult questions. And so you can have Donald Trump, whether you hate him or love him, has is pretty sensitive. If you insult him, he will hit you right back. Now, is Oprah going to be like that? I mean, she has not experienced actual hard-hitting politics of people hitting her with tough questions again and again and again, even insulting her. Will she be gracious like Ronald Reagan, or will she be combative like Donald Trump? We don't know that, but it is a danger to leave your protected little world and enter the very Darwinian jungle of politics, which is Washington today, or dealing with the news media.
I love that Darwinian analogy, survival of the fittest, right? In politics.
Yes, and they're not used to that.
Right. Okay, so last question, or one of the final ones. So recently, Donald Trump, in a meeting on immigration policy, made certain comments which Senator Durbin reported. We all have heard those comments. It's resonated worldwide. There's been a lot of reaction. And the comments were in regard to the description of Africa or African immigrants and then Haiti. People all around the world, maybe here in Ghana and in Africa, look at all of this and say, well, this is language that is not really civil. We expect the presidency to be a position of dignity. There's a form of communication, polite, civil communication. The presidency is a very, very powerful tool that shapes public opinion, that shapes public thought. And so they hear these comments and they wonder, is that normal in American politics? Is this going to affect his standing within the American public? Some have argued that it might resonate with a section of America, a certain population of America. Can you place this in context? Will this affect him? Is this the new age of communication? Is it a way of communicating that he thinks works for him, or it was really a genuine mistake?
Well, remember, Donald Trump was elected because a large number of Americans believed that the present political system was broken. That it was very nice that we had these ladies and gentlemen who were obeying the rules of etiquette and having, gentlemen's debates and like in Parliament or something. But they weren't seeing any benefit of that. America was being run by people who got along with each other, but were not taking care of industry, where America was losing a lot of the jobs that used to be there in factories, especially the lower middle class and lower class. Many, especially white Americans, said, well, okay, how does this system benefit me? So he played into that, saying, I'm not going to be a politician. I'm going to be the anti-politician. I will behave exactly the opposite of the Bushes and the Clintons and the Obamas. And that worked for one election. I mean, I don't know if it's going to work for two elections, and I don't know if it's going to work for his agenda, but that's the point, is that he found he was rewarded for having no interlocutor between his brain and mouth and saying exactly what he thought the moment that he thought it. So that's the background there, is that he hasn't been punished yet. I mean, there hasn't been a midterm election, for example. You might see his behavior change if there was a big Republican loss at the midterms. Second, what he said is what a lot of people think, and they say privately, but you're not supposed to say it in public, right? I mean, I meet people every day who in private will say something which would not look nice if they put it on the front page of the newspaper. You remember we talked about this when you were at Iowa, that you have to be very careful, because nowadays everybody has a cell phone, everybody has a way access to media, and so anything you say could suddenly be a viral video that's embarrassing your mother, right? So don't say anything that your mother isn't going to be ashamed of, right?
That's right.
Well, Donald Trump doesn't care. He's saying these things, and he's learning that, sometimes it probably has more of a negative reaction, but I think a lot of people will listen to that. His base will listen to that and say, well, he's just saying what we all think anyway. I agree that was a terrible term, to use. There's no question about it, and he shouldn't have done it. That's my editorial opinion. But again, his candidacy was based upon, I am not the normal gentleman politician. I'm going to fight for you angrily, hotly, differently than all the people who have failed you in the past, who have been very nice but failed you, including Republicans like Bush. He was running against George Bush and just as much as he was running against Obama and running against Hillary Clinton.
Wow. So, Prof, I was on a program recently and somebody asked me, is his description of Africa, is that what a lot of Americans think? Is that something you'd find?
Yeah, I do. In fact, it was sort of crazy, but I saw a video. You can find it by the comedian Cat Williams. There's like a American comedian. He's an African American comedian,
right?
And I saw him speaking on an African American talk show, and he made this comment about Africa that was absolutely insane. He was describing Africa as being full of nothing but jungle and like giraffes running around and people, like 100 years ago. So, and this was an African American on an African American talk show, and nobody corrected him. I thought that was very strange. I mean, as you know, Africa has cities,
sure,
and airplanes and civilization, and it's had it for a long time. I think there are a lot of people who have a very backwards view of Africa. Now, remember, my grandfather came here as an immigrant from a disputed territory between Russia and Austro-Hungary. On my father's side, my grandfather. Right. And he did not think very well of the land he left behind. People don't immigrate because they're happy, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's much more common that even immigrants, I've heard immigrants speak very disparagingly of their homeland. Oh, everything's terrible there. The government is corrupt. The economy is terrible. So it's sort of a tradition to badmouth other countries, and it's a tradition to badmouth Africa. I think somebody like you, by the way, and the show that you're doing are very good. Africa needs more branding.
Thank you very much.
Outside of Africa, and there need to be more African voices speaking up for Africa and explaining Africa to Americans, but also to Europeans and to Chinese. If you think about the terrible stereotypes of Africa and Africans in Japan and China, they make American stereotypes of Africa look good, So I think we need more communication like this show. But yes, I think Trump said things that a lot of people think but don't say out loud.
Wow. Professor Perlmutter, thank you so much for joining us. I know you and I can chit-chat for a really, really long time, but I'll try to cut it here. Hopefully, we'll be able to have you on again from time to time. Sorry for you being up on an early winter morning. By the way, how's the winter in Texas?
It's cold. It's about 18 degrees, which for Texas is cold. For Iowa, it's not that cold, but for Texas, it's pretty cold.
Wow. Well, thanks for joining us with those insights. I found it refreshing. Really nice talking to you in this circumstance. I know the last time we met, it was in the hallways of journalism school. So it's nice to talk to you on this particular occasion. I'm very grateful you were able to join us, and my regards to you, the family, and the community at Texas Tech, including the Iowa community there.
Thank you, and blessings to you and the people of Ghana, and thank you for all the good work you do for good communications between peoples.
I appreciate it. You trained me well. Bye, sir.
Goodbye.